The oak-paneled doors of the attorney's conference room did not fully close. They left a sliver of an opening, just enough for the voices inside to leak out like the stale air from a sepulcher. Rolled Vick sat in the echarred back chair in the hallway, the one that the receptionist had pointed to with a vague wave of her hand, as if she were directing a deliveryman to the service entrance. He was 74 years old, and his back ached from the cheap upholstery. He had been sitting there for an hour and a half. Through the crack in the door, he could see the back of his sister-in-law's head. Margaret's silver hair was perfectly coiffed, a helmet of polished authority. She was at the head of the table, the throne she had claimed for herself ever since Arthur had been too ill to sit up straight. She was reading aloud from a document, her voice rhying the clipped, impatient cadence of someone who had already decided what the outcome would be and was merely going through the motions. Rold could not hear every word, but he heard enough. He heard his name, or rather, the absence of it. He heard the list of beneficiaries, all of them his nieces and nephews, their spouses, the children of their second cousins, all of them people who have looked at him over the years with a mixture of pity and disdain. He heard the sums of money assigned to each, like prizes at a state fair, and he heard the quiet, satisfied murmur of the family as they learned what they would receive. There was nothing for him. There was never anything for him. He looked down at his hands, the hands that had once held his own infant son, the hands that had built a small business from nothing, the hands that had been offered in help and comfort and support to every single person in that room. They were rough hands now, spotted with age, the knuckles swollen from decades of work. He had given so much of his life to these people, and they had taken it all as if it were owed to them, as if his entire existence were merely a service window for their needs. He remembered the year his daughter had needed a down payment for her first house. She had come to him, her eyes wide with expectation, and he had given her the savings he had set aside for his own retirement. He had told himself it was an investment in her future, and it was, but not in the way he had imagined. She had taken the money, bought the house, and then gradually drifted away, returning only when the roof needed repairs or the property taxes increased. His son Robert had done the same, asking for a loan to start a business, a loan that was never repaid and never mentioned again. Rold had said nothing. He had been raised to believe that family was everything, that you gave until there was nothing left, and then you gave some more, and he had given his children everything. He had given them his time, his energy, his patience, his money. He had forgiven their debts, ignored their condescension, accepted their invitations to holidays only to be seated at the children's table, as if he were a minor inconvenience to be tucked away in the corner. He had endured their jokes about his old-fashioned ways, his refusal to upgrade his flip phone, his insistence on we ring the same rodigan until the elbows were threadbare. They thought he was a relic with just enough money to be useful, but not enough to be respected. That was the crux of it, he realized. They respected money, not age, not wisdom, not the quiet dignity of a man who had worked his whole life without complaint. And because they believed he had so little of the former, they afforded him none of the latter. He shifted in his chair, his hip protesting the movement. Through the crack in the door, he saw his nephew Bradley, lean back in his chair with a triumphant smirk. Bradley was Margaret's son, a man in his early 40s who had made a modest fortune in real estate and never missed an opportunity to remind everyone of it. He was the one who had told Rold, at Arthur's, that he should consider selling his house and moving into a senior community. As if Rold were too old and too poor to manage his own affairs. Rold had smiled at that, the same placid smile he always wore, and said nothing. But he had remembered. He remembered the time Bradley had asked him to co-sign a loan for a speculative property, a deal that reeked of desperation. Rold, because that's what family did. He had signed the paperwork, and when the property went under, it was Rold's credit that took the hit. Bradley never mentioned it again. He had simply moved on to the next deal, the next gamble. The next time he would ask Rold to be his safety net. Rold's daughter-in-law Vanessa was in the room as well. He could see the back of her head, a sleek bob dyed a shade of blonde that nature had never intended. She was embroidered to his son Robert, and she had made it abundantly clear that she considered Rold a financial drain on their household. She had suggested more than once that Robert should have his father declared incompetent, so that they could manage his finances, for his own good. Rold had overheard her saying it at a family barbecue, her voice sweet and venomous, and he had said nothing. He had simply walked back to the grill and turned another steak. But he had remembered. The door swung open suddenly, and Margaret stepped out, her heels clicking on the polished floor. She looked startled to see Rold still sitting there, as if she had expected him to have disappeared, to have melted into the wallpaper like the invisible man he had always been in her eyes. Rold, she said, her voice flat. I didn't realize you were still here. I was waiting, Rold said. I thought there might be something for me. Some message from a author. Margaret Rhett's eyes flickered with something. Irritation, maybe guilt. It was there and gone in an instant. Arthur's wishes were clearly outlined in the will. There's nothing for you, I'm afraid. You should have received a copy in the mail. I didn't receive anything, Roald said. I was told there was a reading today, so I thought I might hear my brother's final words. Margaret pursed her lips, the gesture of a woman who was used to having her authority unchallenged. Arthur's final words were to his family, to his immediate family. You made it very clear over the years that you weren't interested in being part of that. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Roald had been the one who had reached out, who had sent letters and made phone calls, who had tried to bridge the gap that had formed between the brothers. But Arthur had been proud, and Margaret had been jealous, and the gap had widened into a chasm that could never be crossed. Roald said. He stood up slowly, his joints protesting. I'm sorry to have taken up your time. I'll be on my way. He didn't make a scene. He never made a scene. That was not his way. He simply turned and walked toward the elevator, his footsteps echoing in the silent corridor. He could feel Margaret's gaze on his back, could imagine the pity in her eyes, the relief that he was leaving without a fight. The elevator doors opened, and he stepped inside. As the doors closed, he caught a glimpse of the conference room through the crack, saw Bradley and Vanessa and the others gathered around the table, their heads bent together in quiet conversation. They were already dividing the spoils, already planning how they would spend money that had never belonged to them. Roald leaned against the elevator wall and closed his eyes. He had been a fool, he realized, a generous, trusting, foolish old man. He had given and given, believing that his sacrifice would be rewarded with love, with the simple gratitude of family. But love, he had learned, was not a transaction. It was not something you could buy with years of silent service. It was something that had to be freely given, and these people had never been free. They had been bound by their own greed, their own self-interest, their own view of the world. They had looked at him and seen a wallet, nothing more. He felt a familiar weight settle on his chest, the weight of decades of suppressed anger, of swallowed insults, of the endless, grinding patience that had become his defining feature. He had told himself over and over again that it was not his place to complain, that family was supposed to be forgiving, that he should turn the other cheek, but his cheeks were raw now, worn thin from all the blows he had absorbed in silence. And then, as the elevator descended to the lobby, something shifted inside him. It was not anger, not exactly. It was colder than that, more deliberate. It was the quiet settling of a decision that had been forming for years, a decision he had never quite allowed himself to acknowledge. He had been invisible to them. He had been nothing but a source of funds, a fallback plan, a punchline. And he had let them believe that. He had played the part of the impoverished old man, the doddering relative, the one who was always there to help but never there to demand. But it was a lie. The money he had given them over the years was a fraction of what he had. The generosity he had shown them was a fraction of what he could have given. They had never asked about his investments. They had never seen his bank accounts. They had never wondered why an old man who couldn't afford a new car always seemed to have enough cash to cover their emergencies. Because they had never asked. They had never been curious. They had never considered that Roald Vick might be anything other than what they believed him to be, and that Roald realized was his greatest weapon. He had spent his entire life being underestimated. He had endured their contempt, their condescension, their open mockery, and in doing, he had ran to keep his true self hidden. He had run to wear his invisibility like a shield, but shields were not just for defense. They could also be used to hide what you were about to do. The elevator doors opened, and Roald walked through the lobby, past the receptionist who didn't look up from her phone, past the security guard who really nodded, past the gleaming windows that reflected the gray afternoon sky. He stepped out onto the sidewalk and looked up at the building, where his family was still celebrating their windfall. He didn't hate them. He was too old for hate. But he was tired, achingly tired of being the one who gave and gave without ever receiving anything in return. He pulled out his phone, the old flip phone they all teased him about, and flipped it open. He scrolled to a number he had saved years ago but never called, a number that belonged to a man named Marcus Webb, the managing partner of a private investment firm that handled Roald's more complex holdings. Roald said when the call connected. I need you to prepare a full accounting of my assets. Everything, personal, corporate, offshore. I need it in a single document, ready to be presented. There was a pause on the other end. Sir, is everything all right? Everything is fine, Roald said. I just need to know exactly what I have. I'm going to be making some decisions soon, and I need to be precise. Of course, sir. I'll have it ready by the end of the week. Roald closed the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. He stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, watching the cars move, the pedestrians hurrying by. He thought of his children, his grandchildren, his nieces and nephews, all of them gathered in that conference room, all of them certain that they had seen the last of him. They had closed the door on him. They had left him in the hallway, a forgotten relic from a time they would rather not remember. But doors could be opened, and Old Vick, who had spent a lifetime being invisible, was about to walk through one that would change everything. He did not know exactly what he would do yet. He only knew that he would not let them take another piece of him. He would not give another $1, another ounce of his patience to people who had never shown him an ounce of respect. He would wait, he would plan, and when the time was right, he would let them see exactly what they had thrown away. They thought he was nothing. They thought he was a burden, an embarrassment to the family name. They were about to find out how wrong they were. Not today. Today, he would go home, make himself a cup of tea, and sit in his quiet living room with the old photographs he had kept hidden for so many years. He would remember the man he used to be, the man who had built something from nothing, the man who had loved and lost and loved again. And he would begin to plan. The first step was the easiest. It was just a shift in the balance of power, the quiet withdrawal of support. He would stop answering the phone calls. He would stop sending the checks. He would stop being the safety net that had caught them every time they had fallen. They would notice eventually. They would wonder why the money had stopped. They would call him, and he would not answer. They would show up at his door, and he would not open it. And then, when they were desperate enough, when they had finally realized that they needed him more than he needed them, he would show them the document that Marcus Webb was preparing. He would show them the truth, and they would finally understand that the man they had treated like a beggar was worth more than everything they had, and everything they would ever have, combined. The thought was not vengeful. It was simply satisfying. A quiet earth in his chest that felt like the first light of a winter dawn. He had been patient for so long, he had endured so much, and now, for the first time in years, he had a reason to look forward to tomorrow. He began to walk slowly, his pace unhurried. The afternoon sun had broken through the clouds, casting a pale golden light across the city. Old Vick, the forgotten brother, the invisible father, the aging uncle who had been left in the hallway, walked into that light with a steady step and a clear eye. He was not done yet, not by a long shot. The family had made their decision. They had drawn their line in the sand. They had chosen to see him as nothing, to treat him as nothing, to leave him with nothing. But they had forgotten one thing. They had forgotten that he had been a father before he was a wallet. They had forgotten that he had built a life from the ground up, a life they had never bothered to look at closely. They had forgotten that he had been underestimated before, and that underestimating him had always been a mistake. He was Agent Vick, the name that still made men in Bois Rouge rooms across the world straighten their ties. He was the watchman, the silent observer who saw everything and said nothing. He was a man who had survived loss and betrayal and heartbreak, and had come out the other side with his integrity intact. And he was done being invisible. He stopped at a corner and waited for the light to change. The traffic was heavy, the noise of the city a constant hum in his ears. He thought of the conference room, the locked door, the smug faces of his family as they celebrated their victory. They had won a battle, but they had not won the duel. They had no idea that they were sitting on top of a powder keg, and that the fuse had just been lit. Rold smiled, quiet smile that no one around him noticed. He had waited for this moment for years. He had waited through the insults, the snubs, the endless, grinding disrespect. He had waited through the debts that were never repaid, the holidays where he was placed at the children's table, the conversations that stopped whenever he entered a room. He had waited, and now it was time. Not with anger, not with violence, with the quiet, unstoppable power of the truth. They had locked him out of the estate meeting, but they had not locked him out of his own life. They had not taken away the years of work he had done, the CA investments he had made, the fortune he had built in secret. They had not taken away the name that still ride weight in the circles that mattered. They had not taken away anything that truly belonged to him. And that was the part they would never understand, until it was too late. Old Vick walked home from the bus stop. It was 2.5 blocks, a slow and measured pace, his old loafers scuffing against the pavement. The neighborhood was modest, the houses small and neatly kept, the kind of place where people waved to their neighbors and knew each other's dogs by name. He had lived here for 31 years, in the same 3-bedroom colonial with the same chipped white porch railings and the same overgrown rose bushes that Eleanor had planted when they first moved in. He had not changed a thing since she passed, not the furniture, not the wallpaper, not even the arrangement of the magnets on the refrigerator. Time had stopped in that house, and he had let it. He climbed the front steps and unlocked the door. The inside was, the curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. He did not turn on any lights. He knew the layout by heart, could navigate the row hallway and the creaking stairs in complete darkness. That was the thing about living alone for so long. You ran to move through the spaces of your life without needing to see them. He set his keys in the same ceramic bowl by the door, the one his grandson had made in 3rd grade AR class. He draped his cardigan over the back of the same ARM chair, the one with the worn armrests where Eleanor had rested her knitting. He walked into the kitchen and filled the kettle, lit the gas, and waited for the water to boil. The ritual was soothing, the familiar clink of the spoon, the scent of the Earl Grey tea leaves, the guarth of the cup in his hands. He carried the tea into the living room and sat in his usual spot, the armchair that faced the window. From here, he could see the street, the neighbors coming and going, the children playing on the sidewalk. He had watched generations of children grow up on this street, had seen their parents age and their grandparents pass away. He had been a fixture here, a silent observer, the old man with the cup of tea who waved from his window. But today he did not look out at the street. He looked at the photograph on the side table, a faded image of Eleanor in her Garudin, her face half hidden by a sun hat, her smile wide and ungarroted. She had been gone for 11 years now, and still he missed her every single day. She had been the one who had made the house a home, who had filled the rooms with laughter and light. Without her, the house had become a mausoleum, a monument to a life he had lived and lost. He thought of Arthur, his brother. They had been close once, in the years before Margaret, before the money, before the slow drift that had separated them into 2 different lives. Arthur had been the older brother, the one who had taught Rold how to throw a baseball and how to change a tire. But Arthur had also been proud, too proud to admit when he was wrong, and when Margaret had planted the seeds of division, Arthur had watered them with his own stubbornness. The last time Rold had seen his brother, Arthur had been in the hospital, a frail figure propped up against white pillows, his skin the color of old parchment. He had called Rold out of the blue, and Rold had come because that's what family did. Arthur had apologized, his voice thin and reedy, for the years of silence. He had said he wanted to make things right. He had said he wanted Rold to be part of the family again. And then Margaret had walked into the room, and the moment was gone. Arthur had turned away, his face closing like a shutter, and Rold had been asked to leave. He had not seen his brother alive again. That was the memory that gnawed at him now, the image of Arthur's eyes, the flicker of something that might have been regret. He had left the hospital that day feeling a hollow ache in his chest, a sense of something unfinished, and now, with the reading of the will, he understood that the unfinished business would never be resolved. Arthur had tried in his own way to reach out, but Margaret had intervened, as she always did, and Rold had been left in the hallway once again. He set the tea down and picked up the photograph of Eleanor. She had always believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. She had been the one who encouraged him to start his first business, the one who had held his hand when it failed, the one who had never once looked at him with pity. She had seen him for who he truly was, and she had loved him anyway. "You would tell me to let it go," he murmured to her image. "You always said forgiveness was the only way to be free." He sat in the silence for a long time, waiting for some wisdom to come, some piece of Eleanor's gentle counsel that he could ride with him into the days ahead. But the silence gave him nothing but the ticking of the clock and the distant sound of a lawnmower down the street. Forgive. He had been forgiving his family for decades, every slight, every insult, every time they had taken from him without thanks. He had forgiven them because that was what he had been raised to do, because it was easier than confrontation, because he had believed that love would eventually win out over greed. It never had. The love had been all one-sided, a river flowing from him to them, and they had taken it for granted, never once offering anything in return. They had been happy to accept his help, his money, his endless patience, but they had never been happy to accept him. He set the photograph down and picked up his phone again. This time he did not call Marcus Webb. He called his son Robert. Robert answered on the 3rd ring. "Dade, what's going on? Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Harold said. "I just wanted to see how you were doing." There was a pause on the other end, a rustling sound as if Robert was covering the receiver and speaking to someone else. Then he came back on the line, his voice a little less patient. "I'm good, Dad, busy but good. Listen, I'm in the middle of something." "I understand," Harold said. "I'll keep it brief. The estate reading was today, Arthur's will." Robert was silent for a moment. "Yeah, I heard about." Margaret said it was a closed session. "She said you weren't involved." "She told me the same thing," Harold said. "I didn't get anything from Arthur's estate, but that's not why I'm calling. I wanted to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." He took a breath, steadying himself. "The loan I gave you for the business, the one from 15 years ago. Do you remember that?" Robert's voice took on a defensive edge. Dad, we've been over this. That was a long time ago. I was young. I made mistakes. I'm not asking for the money back, Harold said, cutting him off. I'm asking if you remember it. Do you remember that I gave you $30,000, which was everything I had in my savings account at the time? The silence on the other end was heavy, weighted with the same guilt Harold had been crying for himself. Robert Clee read his throat. Yeah, I remember. And do you remember that you told me you would pay it back? That you said it was a loan, not a gift? I remember, Robert said, his voice quieter now. I'm sorry, Dad. I always meant to pay you back, but things just... I know, Harold said. Things happen, I understand. But what I want to know is, did you ever tell Vanessa about the loan? Did you ever tell her that I gave you that money? Robert hesitated. No, she doesn't know. I figured it was private. Harold repeated, the word tasting bitter on his tongue. Yes, it was private, like so many things were private. Like the fact that I gave your sister the down payment for her house. Like the fact that I co-signed Bradley's loan and took the credit hit when he defaulted. Like the fact that I paid for your children's summer camps and private tutoring and college application fees. Letting the weight of his words settle. I've never told anyone any of that, because I didn't want to cause trouble. I didn't want to make you feel obligated. I gave because I wanted to give, but I'm still rotting to realize that maybe I was wrong to keep all of it quiet. Robert's voice was strained now, the patience fraying. I don't know what you're trying to say. If you want me to pay you back, I don't want you to pay me back, Harold said. I don't want anything from you. But I want you to know that I'm done. I'm done giving, done being the one who always says yes, done being the safety net that catches you every time you fall. There was a long silence on the other end. When Robert spoke again, his voice had changed softer, uncertain. Are you okay? You sound... I'm fine, Harold said. I'm better than I've been in a long time. I just wanted you to know you're my son, and I love you, but I can't keep doing this. I can't keep being invisible. He ended the call before Robert could respond. He had not said everything he wanted to say, not by a long shot, but he had said enough. The seed had been planted. The thought would grow in Robert's mind. The slow, uncomfortable realization that his father had been more than just a source of money. He had been a person, a man with feelings and dignity. And they had trampled over both without a second thought. Harold sat in the armchair, the silence settling around him like an old friend. He had felt a strange lightness after the call, a release of pressure he hadn't realized he had been crying. He had spent so many years biting his tongue, swallowing his pride, convincing himself that his silence was a virtue. But silence had only made him smaller in their eyes, a man to be taken for granted. A man who would always be there to pick up the pieces, no more. He thought of M.A. Arcus Webb and the accounting that was being read. He thought of the numbers that would soon be on paper, numbers that would reveal the truth of his life, the life he had built in the shadows. He thought of the faces of his family when they finally saw what he had been hiding, the shock and the disbelief, the desperate scramble to apologize, to make amends, to claw back the affection they had so casually discarded. He did not know if he would forgive them. He was not sure if forgiveness was even possible after so many years of mistreatment. But he knew that he would not let them define him any longer. He would not be their victim, their scapegoat, their forgotten relative. He would be Harold Vick, the man who had built a fortune in secret, the man who had been underestimated by everyone who had ever known him. He would be the man they had never bothered to see. The kettle had gone cold on the stove, the tea forgot. Harold picked up the cup and carried it to the sink, pouring the lukewarm liquid down the drain. He stood at the window for a moment, looking out at the street, at the ordinary lives unfolding in the ordinary houses. He could have stayed in this world, the world of silent suffering and unspoken resentments. He could have continued to be the invisible man, the one who gave and never asked for anything in return. It would have been easier in many ways. It would have been familiar. But Harold was tired of what was familiar. He was tired of the ache in his chest, the weight of all the words he had never said. He was tired of being the forgotten brother, the absent father, the uncle who was only remembered when someone needed something. He walked back to his armchair and sat down. There was a new energy in his bones now, a purpose that had been absent for far too long. He had a plan, a slow and patient plan, and he was ready to execute it. The first step had been taken. The phone calls had been made. The documents were being read now. All he had to do was wait. 3 days passed before the first call came. Harold was in his study, a small room at the back of the house that he had converted into his private workspace. It was cluttered with files and old books, the walls lined with shelves that sagged under the weight of decades of accumulated papers. He had never been a tidy man, not in the way Eleanor had been tidy. He knew where everything was, even if it looked like chaos to anyone else. His phone buzzed on the desk, the old flip phone that had served him faithfully for years. The screen displayed a name he had not expected to see so soon. Bradley rolled, let it ring. He counted the rings, watched the screen flicker with the incoming call, and let it go to voicemail. When it was over, he waited. Less than a minute later, the phone buzzed again. Bradley again. Rolled picked up the phone and answered. Hello, Bradley. Uncle Rolled. Bradley's voice was tight, forced, the tone of a man who was trying very hard to sound casual. Hey, how are you doing? I haven't talked to you in a while. You haven't called me in 3 years, Rolled said. What do you need? There was a pause, as if Bradley was choosing his words with surgical precision. Well, I was just thinking about you. Actually, I was wondering if you could help me with something. It's nothing big, just a small favor. A signature, really. Rolled leaned back in his chair. He knew this dance. He had been dancing it for years. Bradley would come to him with some small favor that was actually a life raft, and Rolled would sign the papers, and Bradley would disappear until the next crisis. I'm listening, Rolled said. It's just a loan extension, Bradley said, his voice quickening, the words tumbling out in a rush. I have a property that's about to close, but the bank is dragging their feet on the final approval. I need someone to co-sign a short-term bridge loan, just for 30 days. I'll pay it back, of course. You know I'm good for it. Rolled did not answer immediately. He let the silence stretch. Let the weight of Bradley's need fill the space between them. Bradley, he said finally. Do you remember the last time I co-signed a loan for you? There was a pause. That was different. That was a bad mistake. It wasn't my fault. It was your fault, Rolled said, his voice level. You made a bad investment. You took a risk you shouldn't have taken, and when it went under, it was my credit that was damaged. I had to refinance my own mortgage at a higher rate because of your small favor. Bradley's tone shifted, a hint of defensiveness creeping in. I didn't hear you complaining at the time. You said you were happy to help. I was happy to help, Rolled said. I have always been happy to help. But that doesn't mean I'm going to keep helping you indefinitely. I have a question for you, Bradley. Do you know what the interest rate is on the loans you currently see? A long silence. I'm not sure. I'd have to check. The interest rate is 14.7%, Rolled said. You have $4.3 million in outstanding debt. Your debt-to-income ratio is over 50%. Your creditors are reconsidering calling in your notes, and you have no liquid assets to cover them. You're drowning, Bradley. And you're looking for me to throw you a rope. Bradley's voice was the veneer of casualness stripped away. Who told you that? That's confidential information. I don't know how you could possibly know. I know a lot of things, Rolled said. I know your wife is planning to leave you. I know your children's tuition is 3 months overdue. I know that you lost your LA Regest investor last quarter and that you've been lying to your PA partners about the state of your portfolio. The silence on the other end was deafening. Rolled could hear Bradley's breathing, rapid and shallow. The sound of a man who had just realized that his lifeboat had a hole in it. How? Bradley's voice was really a whisper. How do you know all of this? I pay attention, Rolled said. I've always paid attention. You just never noticed. He ended the call. It was not a dramatic gesture, not a slammed phone or a shouted accusation. It was simply the quiet click of a connection being severed. Rolled sat in the silence of his study, the weight of the conversation settling around him. He had just done something he had never done before. He had refused to be the safety net, the fallback, the man who always said yes. It felt strange and liberating and terrifying all at once. He thought of Eleanor, of what she would have said. She would have been proud of him, he knew. She had always wanted him to stand up for himself, to demand the respect he deserved. But she had also been gentle, and she might have worried that he was being too rash. But he wasn't being a rush. He was being honest. For the first time in his life, he was being honest about what he had given and what he had received in return. The equation had never been balanced. It had been a one-way street, and he had been the one doing all the driving. He did not feel guilty. That was the surprising PA. He had expected to feel a pang of remorse, the familiar ache of a man who had been raised to put family first, but instead he felt something else. He felt free. The phone buzzed again. This time it was his daughter, Claire. Her voice was bright, the voice she used when she wanted something. Hey, how are you? I was just thinking about you. Hello, Claire. Rolled said. What do you need? Her tone shifted, a hint of irritation creeping in. Why do you always assume I need something? Can't I just call to say hello? Rolled said. But you usually don't. There was a pause, a weighted silence that told him he had struck a nerve. Claire read her throat. Okay, fine. I do need something. It's just a small thing. The roof on the house needs repairs, and the contractor is asking for a deposit. I know you've helped me before, and I was hoping. You had your roof repaired last year, Rolled said. You told me you were going to use the money I gave you for the down payment on the house. I did use it for that, Claire said quickly. This is a different thing. The roof is leaking again. It's just bad luck, Harold repeated. Or maybe it's the same shoddy contractor you used before, the one who didn't do the job right the first time. Why would you go back to him? Claire's voice grew defensive. He was cheap. I didn't have a lot of money to spend, because you spent the money I gave you on a new CAR instead of paying the contractor properly. Harold said. I know about the CAR, Claire. I've always known. The silence on her end was as sharp as a slap. He could imagine her face, the flush of embarrassment, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. Dade, that's not fair, she said finally. I needed a new. The old one was falling apart. The old one was fine, Harold said. It had 120,000 miles on it, but it was well maintained. You could have kept it for another 2 years. But you wanted something shiny and new, and you used my money to get it. You didn't even ask, you just took it. He took a breath, steadying himself. I'm done, Claire. I'm done being your ATM. I'm done being the one you call when your life falls apart. You're a grown woman, you have a job, you have a husband. Figure it out yourself. He ended the call before she could respond. His hand was trembling slightly. A mix of adrenaline and something that might have been relief. He had said no to his daughter, his own child. It was the hardest thing he had done in years, and it was also the most necessary. He thought about the pattern, the way his children and their spouses had treated him like a resource rather than a relative. They had called him when they needed money. They had visited him when they needed a favor. They had kept him at arm's length for everything else, never asking about his life, his health, his feeling. He had been a tool to them, nothing more. He walked to the window and looked out at the street. The evening was settling in, the sky a deep purple, the streetlights flickering to life. He could see the neighbors' houses, the lights glowing in the windows, the silhouettes of families gathered around dinner tables. He had not had a family dinner in years, not a real, not one where he felt welcome and valued. He thought about the estate, about Arthur's will, about Margaret's smug face as she had read out the names of the beneficiaries. She had won that battle. She had locked him out of the room and kept him out of the will, but she had not won the guerre. She didn't even know the duel was being fought. The phone buzzed one more time. This time, it was Margaret herself. Harold picked up the phone, not to answer, but to look at the screen. Margaret Vick, the woman who had orchestrated his exclusion, who had intercepted his brother's letters, who had convinced the family that he was nothing. He did not answer. He let it ring, watched the screen until it went dark. He would not answer Margaret's calls. Not today, not tomorrow. He would let her stew, let her wonder why the old man who always said yes had suddenly stopped. She would figure it out soon enough. They all would. He set the phone down and walked to his desk. He pulled out a leather-bound journal, the one he had kept for years, recording his thoughts and observations in full, precise handwriting. He opened to a fresh page and began to write. January the first refusal. Bradley called, needing a co-signer. I said no. Called, needing money for her roof. I said no. Margaret called, but I did not answer. This is the beginning. They will not understand at first. They will be angry, then confused, then desperate, and when they are desperate, I will show them the truth. They have taken from me for the last time. He closed the journal and set it aside. He was not a vengeful man. He was not doing this to punish them. He was doing it to protect himself, to reclaim the dignity they had stripped from him piece by piece over the years. He looked at the clock on the wall. It was almost 8 o'clock. He had not eaten dinner yet, but he was not hungry. The adrenaline was still coursing through him, a strange and powerful energy that made food seem irrelevant. He walked to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. He stood at the sink, looking out the window at the dairying yard. The rose bushes were a tangle of berry branches, waiting for spring. He thought of the meeting with Arcus Webb that was scheduled for tomorrow. The accounting was nearly ready. A document that would reveal the full extent of his holdings. It would be a bombshell. A revelation that would change everything. But he was not ready to show it yet. He would wait. He would let the silence do its work. Let the family's desperation build to a fever pitch. And then, when they were at their lowest, when they had finally realized that they needed him more than he needed them, he would reveal the truth. He would show them the document. He would show them who he truly was. And they would never underestimate him again. The thought was not bitter. It was not sweet. Either it was simply right. It was the natural order of things, the balance that had been so long disrupted finally being restored. He finished his water and set the glass in the sink. He walked through the house, turning off the lights, checking the locks. The routine was automatic, the same every night, a comfort in its familiarity. He climbed the stairs to his bedroom, his joints aching from the day's exertions. The bedroom was dark, the curtains drawn, the old mahogany dresser casting long shadows in the dim light. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped in his lap. He thought of Eleanor, of her gentle smile, her steady presence. He wished she were here, to hold his hand, to tell him that everything was going to be all right. But she wasn't here. He was alone. He had been alone for a long time. Even when the house was full of family, they had never truly been with him. They had always been taking, always planning their next withdrawal. He lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, he would see Margaret's web. He would review the documents. He would set the next phase of his plan in motion. And then, he would wait. He was good at waiting. He had been waiting his whole life. The offices of Webb and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a building in Midtown Manhattan, a glass and steel monolith that reflected the gray winter sky. Rold had been here many times over the years, but always through a side entrance, always with a quiet nod to the security guard, always leaving no trace of his visits. Today, he walked through the main lobby, past the marble reception desk, and into the elevator that would take him to the 42nd floor. Margaret Webb was waiting for him in the conference room, a space that was all clean lines and muted colors, the kind of room designed to make people feel important and insignificant at the same time. Marcus was a man in his late 50s, lean and she-featured, with the kind of restless energy that came from managing other people's money. He had been Rold's financial advisor for nearly 2 decades, and in all that time, he had never once asked Rold about his family. It was one of the reasons Rold trusted him. Marcus said, extending his hand. "Good to see you. I have the documents you requested. Please, have a seat." Rold settled into the leather chair across from Marcus, the same chair he had occupied for countless meetings over the years. The conference table between them was polished to a high gloss, reflecting the soft light from the ceiling fixtures. Marcus slid a thick folder across the table. "This is the full accounting, as requested. I've broken it down into categories: liquid assets, real estate holdings, equity position, and alternative investments. I've also included a summary of your offshore accounts and the various trusts that hold your non-public holdings." Rold opened the folder and began to read. He did not rush. He took his time, letting the numbers settle into his mind. He had seen these figures before, of course, but never all in one place, never in such a clean and organized format. It was one thing to know that you were wealthy. It was another thing to see the evidence spread out before you in black and white. The total was staggering. Not in the way that some fortunes were staggering, with billions stacked in neat rows. Rold's wealth was not that kind of wealth. It was deeper than that, more tangled, more difficult to quantify. He had built his fortune over decades, through careful investments and strategic acquisitions, through partnerships and deals that no one had ever heard of. His name was not on any public list of billionaires. It was not on any public list at all. But the numbers in the folder told a story that would have made the most jaded Wall Street analyst sit up and take notice. Marcus watched him read, his expression neutral. "Eyes, everything in order." Rold nodded slowly. "This is comprehensive, thank you. I also took the liberty of preparing a simplified version, a 1-page summary that you could use for presentation purposes. I assumed you might want to share this information with someone at some point." Rold looked up. "Why would you assume that?" Marcus smiled, a thin, knowing smile. "Because you asked for a complete accounting. Rold, you've never done that before. In all the years I've worked with you, you've always been content to let things run in the background. You've never wanted to know the full picture. I figured something must have changed." Rold set the folder down. "Something has changed. I'm going to need to present this information. Not today, but I want to be prepared." Marcus nodded. "Is there anything else I can do for you?" Rold thought for a moment. "Yes, I need you to prep a formal valuation of my holdings, as if I were applying for a loan or a line of credit. I want it to be thoroughly documented, with third-party verifications where possible." Marcus raised an eye. "That's a significant request. It could take a few weeks to compile, but I can do it." "Take the time," Rold said. "I'm in no rush." He gathered the folder and stood up. "Rose as well," extending his hand again. "Rold, I don't pry into my clients' personal lives, but I will say this: if you need any additional support, legal or otherwise, we have resources. You don't have to handle this alone." Rold took his hand. "Thank you, Marcus. I appreciate that." He left the office and took the elevator down to the lobby. The midtown streets were bustling, the sidewalks crowded with people in heavy coats, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Rold walked to a nearby, ordered a cup of tea, and found a quiet table in the corner. He set the folder on the table and opened it again. He wanted to read the numbers once more, to let them sink into his consciousness. He had built all of this. He had done it alone, without help from anyone. Without the support of the family that had turned their backs on him. He had done it in secret, in the quiet hours when no one was watching. In the long years when they had all assumed he was nothing. And now, he was going to show them. He closed the folder and sipped his tea. The cafe was, the hum of conversation a low background noise. He thought of Eleanor, of how proud she would have been. She had never read about money, not really. She had read about him, about the man he was, about the quiet dignity he ride even when the world was against him. He had lost her too soon, and he had spent the years since trying to fill the void with work, with accumulation. with the endless pursuit of something he could never quite name. But now, he knew what he had been chasing. He had been chasing recognition, not the kind that came from strangers, but the kind that came from the people who were supposed to love him. He had wanted them to see him, to see what he had built, to finally understand that he was not the failure they had always believed him to be. He was going to get that recognition. One way or another his phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. He opened it and read the words. "A rolled. This is Lauren. I need to talk to you. It's important. Please call me." Lauren, his niece. The one who had scrolled through her phone during the estate reading, who hadn't looked at him once. She was the youngest of Arthur's children, the one who had always seemed more interested in her social life than her family. Harold had never had a real conversation with her, not in all the years she had been alive. He set the phone down and did not respond. He would call her when he was ready, if he was ever ready. The silence was his weapon now, and he was not going to lay it down just because someone had finally remembered his name. He finished his tea and walked back to the street. The sky was, the clouds low and heavy, promising snow. He pulled his coat tighter and began to walk, not toward the sup, but toward the river. He needed to think, to clear his head, to let the cold air sharpen his mind. He walked along the waterfront, past the office buildings and the construction sites, past the joggers and the tourists, past the city that was always moving, always changing. He was a part of this city. He realized he had been a part of it for decades, even when he had felt invisible. He had built his life here, his fortune. He had roots that went deep into the concrete and the steel, and he was not going to let anyone uproot him again. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Margaret. He did not answer. He let it ring, counted the rings, and then watched the screen go dark. A moment, a voicemail notification appeared. He did not listen to it. He had heard enough of Margaret's voice to last a lifetime. He continued walking, his pace steady, his mind calm. He had the documents now. He had the numbers. He had everything he needed to begin the final phase of his plan, but he was not going to rush. He had waited too long to let impatience ruin everything. He would move slowly, carefully, the way he had always moved. He would let the silence do its work. He would let the family's desperation build until they were ready to hear what he had to say. And then he would speak. He thought about what he would say, the words he would use. He wanted to be clear, to be precise, to leave no room for misunderstanding. He wanted them to know exactly what they had done, exactly what they had lost. He wanted them to understand that the man they had treated like nothing was worth more than everything they had ever had. He walked until his legs ached, until the cold had seeped through his coat and into his bones. Then he turned and began the long walk back to the subway. He had things to do, preparations to make. The documents were just the beginning. There were conversations to have, letters to write, decisions to make. He was done being invisible. He was done being silent. The time had come to let his family see the truth. But not yet. He would wait. He would choose the right moment, the right setting, the right words. He would not let them see him angry or desperate. He would show them only calm, only certainty, only the quiet power of a man who had nothing left to prove. He bow-rotted the subway and found a seat in the corner. The car was the usual mix of commuters and tourists, of people in suits and people in uniforms. Harold looked at them, at their tired faces and their weary eyes, and he felt a strange kinship. They were all fighting their own battles, carrying their own burdens. They were all invisible in their own way. But he was not going to be invisible anymore. He got off at his stop and walked home through the quiet streets. The neighborhood was peaceful, the houses da. He climbed the steps to his front door and unlocked it, stepping into the familiar dimness of his living room. He did not turn on the lights. He walked to his armchair and sat down, the folder from Webb & Associates resting on his lap. He ran his hand over the cover, feeling the smoothness of the leather. He had done it. He had taken the first real step toward reclaiming his life. He had said no to Bradley, to Claire, Rhett. He had stopped the flow of money, stopped the endless giving, stopped the quiet erosion of his dignity. He had not won yet. He had not shown them the truth. But he was closer than he had ever been. He closed his eyes and let himself rest. The silence of the house was no longer oppressive. It was a respite, a waiting room for the storm that was about to break. And when it broke, he would be ready. He would be standing in the center of it all, calm, watching his family's world crumble around them. It was not a thought that gave him pleasure. It was a thought that gave him peace. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Harold found it in his mailbox, sandwiched between a utility bill and a flyer for a local pizza place. It was thick, cream-colored, the kind of paper that cost more than it should. There was no return address, but he recognized the handwriting. It was Margaret's precise and angular, the script of a woman who had spent a lifetime controlling every detail of her world. He read the envelope inside and set it on the kitchen counter. He did not open it immediately. He made his tea, the same Earl Grey, the same chipped ceramic mug, The same ritual that had ca ride him through countless mornings. He sat in his armchair and sipped the tea, letting the dew aromath spread through his chest. The envelope sat on the counter waiting. He thought about the past weeks, the silence he had imposed on his family. It had been nearly a month since the estate reading, a month of unanswered calls and unopened messages. Bradley had called 7 times, then stopped. Claire had left 3 voicemails, each one more desperate than the last. Lauren had sent a text that said only, "Please, Uncle Rolt, I need to explain." Margaret had called every other day, her voice growing thinner and more strained with each attempt. He had not responded to any of them. He had let the silence do its work. The first cracks had read sooner than he expected. Bradley's creditors had called in his notes, just as Rolt had predicted. The real estate empire that Bradley had built on borrowed money was crumbling, the properties being repossessed one by one. Rolt had heard through his sources that Bradley was living in a rented apartment now, his wife having finally followed through on her threat to leave him. Claire's situation was less dramatic but no less painful. Her husband had lost his job, and they were struggling to make the mortgage payments. The car that Claire had bought with Rolt's money had been repossessed, and she was driving an old sedan that smelled of mildew and regret. Lauren had reached out to Rolt directly, bypassing the family network. She had been the first to realize that something had shifted, that the old rules of the family no longer applied. She had sent him a long email, rambling and emotional, in which she confessed that she had known about Margaret's interference in Arthur's correspondence. She had known about the intercepted letters, the redirected phone calls. She had kept silent because she was afraid. Because she had always been afraid of her mother. Rolt had read the email twice and then deleted it. He had not responded, and Margaret, the architect of it all, was the one who had suffered the most. Her offshore accounts, the ones she had siphoned from Arthur's estate, had come under scrutiny. The shell companies she had used to hide her theft had been traced, the money frozen, the legal notices piling up on her doorstep. She had been forced to sell her house, her car. She had moved into a small apartment in a part of the city she had always considered beneath her. Rolt had known all of this. He had watched it unfold, a silent observer, a god of his own small universe. He had not lifted a finger to help them, and he had not felt a shred of guilt. But now the envelope sat on his counter, and he knew that the time for silence was over. He finished his tea and walked to the kitchen. He picked up the envelope and opened it with a butter knife. See a refill not to the expensive paper. Inside was a single sheet, folded neatly in thirds. He unfolded it and read. Rolt, I am writing to you because I have no one else to turn to. I know that I have wronged you. I know that the words "I'm sorry" will never be enough, but I want you to know that I understand now. I understand what I did, and I understand why you have turned away from us. I was cruel to you, I was jealous of you. I was afraid of what you might become if Arthur had let you back into his life. I thought I was protecting my family. I was protecting only myself. If you can find it in your heart to forgive me, I would like to see you. I would like to tell you the truth. Face to face, I am staying at the old house. The one I sold to pay my debts. The new owners have given me a week to clear out the last of my things. Please come, I will be here until Friday. Rolt read the letter twice. He could hear Margaret's voice in the words, the same clipped precision, but with an undertone that was new. It was humility. It was something he had never heard from her before. He folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. He did not decide immediately whether he would go. He let the thought sit in his mind, turning it over, examining it from all angles. He thought about Arthur's house, the old colonial on Maple Street where he had spent so many holidays, so many family gatherings. He thought about the porch where he had sat with his brother, drinking lemonade and watching the children play in the yard. He thought about the dining room table, the one that had been in the family for generations, the one where Arthur had announced his engagement to Margaret, the one where Rolt had sat alone after Eleanor died, surrounded by people who pretended not to see his grief. He thought about the last time he had been in that house. It had been the day of Arthur's funeral. A gray, rainy afternoon that matched the mood of the family. Margaret had been cold, distant, already calculating what she would inherit. The children had been too busy with their own lives to notice their uncle standing in the corner, a ghost among the living. He had left that house feeling like he had lost something he could never get back. Not just, but the idea of family itself. The belief that blood was thicker than water, that love would always find a way. He had been wrong about that. But he had also been wrong about something else. He had believed that his family would never change, that they were locked in their selfishness, destined to repeat the same mistakes over and over. Margaret's letter suggested otherwise. It suggested that she had finally seen the truth, that she had finally understood what she had done. He was not naive. He knew that a letter was just words, that people could say anything when they were backed into a corner. But he also knew that Margaret had never been the kind of woman to admit weakness, to apologize, to expose herself to judgment. The fact that she had written this letter was significant, a shift in the tectonic plates of their family history. He decided to go. He drove to Maple Street the next afternoon, the old sedan that he had kept despite his wealth, the one his family had teased him about for years. The car was reliable, unremarked. The kind of vehicle that belonged to an old man with nothing to prove. He rocketed across the street from the house and sat for a moment, looking at the familiar facade. The house was smaller than he remembered, the paint peeling, the porch sagging. The new owners had not taken care of it. It was a monument to a family that had fallen apart. He walked up the front steps and knocked on the door. The sound echoed through the empty rooms, a hollow, lonely sound. The door opened, and Margaret stood before him. She looked different, older, smaller. The armor of expensive clothes and perfect hair was gone. She wore a simple sweater, her gray hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. Her face was lined with worry, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She said, her voice really a whisper, "You came." He nodded. "You asked me to." She stepped aside, and he walked into the house. It was empty, the furniture gone. Only the echoes of a life that had once filled the rooms. The floors were the walls marooned with the ghosts of pictures that had hung there for decades. Margaret led him to the living room, where a single folding chair sat in the center of the empty space. She sat down and Rold remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. "I don't know where to begin," Margaret said. "There's so much I need to say." "Start with the truth," Rold said. "Just the truth, no excuses." She nodded, her hands trembling in her lap. "I intercepted Arthur's letters because I was afraid. I was afraid that if he reconciled with you, he would leave you everything. I was afraid that he would finally see that I had been taking money from the estate. I was afraid of being exposed." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. "It was all art. I was so afraid of losing what I had that I destroyed everything. I destroyed Arthur's last chance to make things right. I destroyed your trust. I destroyed my own family." Rold did not speak. He let her words hang in the air, let them settle. "And I have nothing now," she continued. "No money, no house, no respect. My children won't speak to me. Bradley blames me for his bankruptcy. Claire blames me for not telling her the truth about Arthur's will. I have lost everything I cared about." Wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "But I have also found something. I have found clarity. I see now that I was never happy. I was never satisfied. I was always chasing more. Always afraid that someone would take what I had. And in the end, I lost it all anyway." Rold walked to the window and looked out at the street. He thought about the years he had spent in this house, the years of silent suffering, the years of being overlooked and undervalued. He thought about the day he had sat in the hallway outside the attorney's conference room, waiting for a moment that never came. He thought about Eleanor, about her gentle voice, her wise eyes. He thought about what she would have said. She would have told him to forgive, to let go of the anger, to find peace in the act of mercy. "It's not about forgiveness," Rold said, turning to face May. "It's about understanding. I have spent my whole life trying to be invisible, trying to be small, trying to be the person you all wanted me to be, and I see now that it was a mistake. I should have stood up for myself a long time ago." Margaret nodded, her face pale. "I was wrong about you, Rold. I was wrong about everything." Rold said. "But I'm not here to gloat. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to close a chapter. I'm here to say goodbye." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. It was the same cream-colored paper that Margaret had used for her letter. Inside was a single check, made out to Margaret Vick, for an amount that would cover all her debts and leave her with enough to start over. She took the envelope and opened it. When she saw the number, her face went white. "Rold, I can't accept this. I don't deserve this." "That's not for you to decide," Rold said. "I'm not giving you this because you deserve it. I'm giving it to you because it's what Arthur would have wanted, and because I'm done being angry. It's time to let go." Margaret looked at the check, her hands shaking. She started to cry. A raw, ugly sound that filled the empty room. Rold walked to the door and paused. He looked back at her, this woman who had been his enemy for so long. "Take care of yourself, Red," he said, "and take care of your children. They still have a chance." He stepped out of the house and closed the door behind him. The afternoon sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the street. He walked to his car and got in, but he did not start the engine. He sat, looking at the house that held so many memories, good and bad. He thought about the will, the family that had locked him out. He thought about the documents in his study, the ones that proved his worth, the ones he had been so eager to share. He realized that he didn't need to share them. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He had already proven it to himself. He started the car and drove away. He did not look back. The drive home was quiet, the streets familiar, the rhythm of the traffic soothing. He pulled into his driveway and walked up the steps to his front door. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was warm and welcoming. He walked to his room chair and sat down. On the side table was the photograph of Eleanor, her smile as bright as ever. "I did it," he said to her image. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He had one message from an unknown number. He opened it. Uncle Ash rolled its loin. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm going to try to be better. I promise." Rold smiled. It was a small smile, a quiet smile, but it was real. He set the phone down and looked out the window. The street was quiet, the neighbors' lights beginning to glow in the gathering dusk. He had spent his whole life waiting for someone to open a door for him, and now he realized he had always had the key. He just had to learn how to use it. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the sky, faint and distant but steady. Rold Vick, the man who had been invisible for so long, sat in his room chair and watched them rise. He was not invisible anymore. He never had been.